And the last explanation I'll mention, and this is explanation Ibn Hajar after analyzing all these opinions, he says this is the soundest explanation in his opinion. And this comes from the understanding of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, the great companion. In his opinion, this meant only the passing of knowledge, nothing else. So in other words, this meant, it was referring to the passing of knowledge. So that Ibn Mas'ud, he had many statements to this regard. Among them, he said, no day will come upon you except that it will be worse than the preceding one until the hour is established. In Ibn Mas'ud, he says, I am not talking about worldly luxuries, nor am I talking about wealth, but I am talking about the passing of people of knowledge, ذهاب العلماء. And he said in another note, وَمَا ذَاكَ بِكَثْرَةِ الْأَمْطَارِ وَلَا بِقِلَّتِهَا وَلَكِنْ بِذَهَابِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. He said, I am not talking about, and this is a narration of Ibn Mas'ud, I'm not talking about, the withholding of rain or more rain or luxuries or worldly things, but we're talking about the passing of people of knowledge. And in other narrations, people of the scholars and jurists of this ummah. So this is an explanation, perhaps this is the soundest explanation that refers to people of knowledge. And in general, the farther we get away from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the less and less we have knowledge. We all know this is true. And Mullah Ali al-Qari, rahimahullah, he says, it's like the Prophet's time was like a shining lamp. The farther you get from that time of the Prophet, the farther and farther the light of the Prophet. So it becomes darker and darker. And this is a beautiful analogy that's sufficient to understand what this text really means. Now, finally, let's turn to the point. First of all, there's some problematic understanding. Sometimes when you understand this in the wrong way, it leads to certain things. Among the things that it has led to historically is a pacifist understanding. Sometimes you'll look at this hadith, okay, things are just going to get worse, so be quiet and sit in your house. Don't do anything about it. And this is the understanding many people have advocated based on this narration. Also leads to a fatalistic outlook. And no matter what you do, things are just going to get worse and worse. So this is the danger of understanding this narration in this respect. And it also leads to a pessimistic outlook on life. So that rather than looking at things optimistically, sometimes looking at this narration, you come across understanding, you become a pessimist. What are we doing then? So these are some of the traps of shaitan. And sometimes, these understandings you'll find in books of our tradition, unfortunately. And I'll just read to you, unfortunately, the commentary on Riyad al Saliheen that all of us read from Dar es Salaam, which is a beautiful commentary, but in this particular narration, what it says is really unfortunate, and it's really not in the spirit of Islam. I'll just read to you briefly. It's a one-paragraph commentary, and it says that this hadith contains a prediction that with the passage of time, conditions will become from bad to worse, with the result that the rulers would become more and more cruel. In such circumstances, the remedy suggested here is that rather than making any effort to reform the rulers, one should try to reform oneself and worry to make one's own life in the hereafter and endure patiently the tyrannies perpetrated by the rulers. So this, unfortunately, this is not the correct understanding. This is an understanding that sometimes we find in our books. Sometimes everything that's written in our books is in wahi. The Quran and the Sunnah is wahi. But everything else, is our human understanding. So people can be wrong. And these are some of the things that come out. In many books of the commentary, they mention, for instance, it is said by some scholars, it is mandatory to be patient with the tyranny of the rulers, because the rulers are placed over the people as a punishment for their own actions and their own injustices. And so much so, some scholars say every single wrong thing that is done by the rulers upon their societies is because of an evil that the masses have, that they deserve. So they should be patient with that. So this is, unfortunately, this is not really the correct understanding, and this is not the understanding, this is not a unanimous understanding. Sometimes it's presented as a unanimous understanding of early Muslims, but if you look at the companions, radiallahu anhum, there were very different stripes. They had different temperaments, they have different attitudes, they have different styles, they had different methodologies, and they had different understandings of how to deal with things. So for instance, the civil war that happened early on in the time of the companions, and forgive me for being too long, but sometimes you have to look at these things critically. But the civil war that happened between the companions, there were different approaches from the companions. And we say, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in, Allah be pleased with all of them. Some of the companions, they were proactive. They said, no, what's happening is not right, we have to do something. And who were companions? These were like Aisha radiyallahu anha, right? Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiyallahu anhu. Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet radiyallahu anhu. All these companions, they felt, no. When things are wrong, we look at what our Prophet taught us, Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadi. This is a prophetic principle. Whoever sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. If you can't do it, then with your tongue. And if you can't even do that, then with your heart, and that's the weakest of faith. And these companions said, no, we don't want to be weak-hearted in faith. We need to do something about what's happening before us, so they took charge. Other companions, they withdrew, and among them was Anas bin Malik, among them were Ibn Umar, radiyallahu anhum. They said, what's happening is wrong, we should withdraw and just teach people Quran. So that was a different approach. We don't blame that approach, and we don't blame any of these. But there were different approaches. But sometimes when you see certain opinions being expressed, sometimes really it's, you have to look at who's expressing, and sometimes there's some agenda behind it, unfortunately. And there's a story narrated by many of these people that some of the Umayyad rulers, or one of them, gathered all of the people that were complaining about the rule, right? So this was an unjust ruler. So people were complaining about what was happening. So he gathered all the people and he asked them, "Oh people, would you like to be ruled by people like Umar and Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhum?" And they said, "Of course, we would want rulers like Abu Bakr and Umar." So he said to them, "Then be like the followers of Abu Bakr and Umar, then we'll be like Abu Bakr and Umar to you." So this is, one of some of the stories that are transmitted. But anyway, the point, brothers and sisters, that this hadith is never meant to be, fatalistic, or to be pacifist, or to have a pessimistic outlook on life. Rather, what the Prophet is teaching us, and what Anas bin Malik was advocating, he was laying a general principle. And that principle is basically a natural law. And that's something, if we look at our lives, is very true. That is, with passing of time, generally morality declines. Good things go down. Enthusiasm declines, passion declines, emotions decline. It's a natural thing. The Prophet was just stating a natural fact, that with the passage of time, things generally get worse. Until people come along and restore order. So that's, if you look at the religions, all the prophets and Anbiya alayhimus salam, what did they do? Allah established Tawheed from day one with Adam alayhi salam. But eventually people begin to forget, that's human nature, and then Allah sent messengers and prophets to revive the order and bring people back to that balance. And after the prophets passed away, the people who were warners, the da'is, and the people who were revivalists, that's their job. And that's why there's a sound hadith from Abu Dawood that the Prophet said, "Inna Allah yab'athu bihadihi al-umma ala ra'si kulli mi'ati sanatin man yujaddid laha dinaha." The Prophet said that very Allah will place at the head of every 100 years for this ummah, this nation, those or that person or those people that will revive the deen for them. That means there's a tradition of revival. That means when things get bad to worse, eventually someone comes along where he restores order and brings people back to the sunnah when they're misguided. So we should look at things from an optimistic approach and a proactive approach. That when things go from bad to worse, it's our job to restore order. We don't put our hands down and we step back, but we should restore order and restore the balance. So what Anas bin Malik was saying, fasbiru, be patient. And patience doesn't mean just step back. Patience means many things in different circumstances, but sometimes you need to be passive. Sometimes, you have to look at the hikmah, the wisdom of things, and generally it's not right, to create more chaos. So sometimes the situation dictates different strategies and different recourses. But generally the principle that the Prophet was establishing is a sound principle. When we look at our lives, look at our grandparents and our parents, we always hear things, how things used to be, how things are now. Right before coming to the masjid, just a few minutes, I just came home from work and I had 20, 30 minutes before coming here. Someone knocked on the door and I'm trying to eat dinner and getting ready for this, and we're saying, who is it? It was some cable guy. So this cable guy comes to the house and he says to us, "I noticed that you're the only house on the block that doesn't have Cablevision or Optimum. So I wanted to present, our package to you." And I told him, the reason for that is very simple. We're probably the only house that doesn't have a TV. And this guy, his jaw dropped. And he was staring at us for a few seconds. And then he said, "Oh, you don't have a TV?" I said, "No." And he said, "Explain that to me. I come from a younger generation." So the point is, he immediately associated that with a difference of time, right? Generations. I'm a younger guy, maybe you're from an older generation, things are different from that time to now. So in a few minutes, I was trying to explain to him, I don't know how much he understood. But the point is, this is a human principle. In every society, things generally decline. Our grandparents' generation was vastly different from our generation. And in every era, it's been pretty much the same situation. So this is what the Prophet meant, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we'll close. The last thing, I'll close with the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who mentioned some words about sabr. And that really drives the point home, and we'll close with that. He said, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجَ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ وَأَنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Know that with patience comes victory. And with every calamity comes a way out. And with every difficulty comes ease. So this is the approach, brothers and sisters, that when we see difficult times, know that there's an easier time coming after it. Don't be pessimistic, no, it's just going to get worse, there's nothing we can do. But with every difficult time, there's going to be a brighter time. And with every patience that we exhibit, Allah is going to show us victory. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the people of victory, the people who see good times and not bad times. وصلى الله على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. With that, we'll open the floor for any questions and comments. Our dear President.